Thank you to the workshop presenters for the invitation to talk. I come from an organization in Nairobi, Kenya called Farmers Choice Limited. We are basically a vertically integrated pig producing and processing company, the largest in East and Central Africa at this time. Large by our standards, but possibly quite small when compared to elsewhere in the world. We have our own farms with about 2,000 pigs, and we work with contract farmers, small-scale farmers who hold another 10,000 sows or so. So my talk is about breeding challenges faced by the smallholder. And I will give a general introduction about the livestock industry in Africa, and then narrow in on what the smallholder is doing or the challenges they are facing. And then I will also highlight what we as Farmers Choice have done to address the challenges that we face with the smallholder farmers who work for us or who we work with. So looking at the livestock industry in Africa, the overview, it is quite an integral part of the economy in Africa, with about 80% of the population depending on livestock. It is projected to grow. We are actually already seeing the growth and the demand on livestock products as the populations grow, as incomes increase. We are seeing a change in consumer patterns. So there's higher demand for food of animal protein origin. So we are already looking at how are we going to feed this increasing population. Africa has 7 out of the 10 fastest growing economies as projected in the world. And there's also urbanization, which on its own has come with challenges when you look at what is happening in the farming world as well. So over half of the population will be living in urban areas by the year 2050. And this has had an impact in land use and the sizes of farms that our smallholder farmers are dealing with. So millions of livelihoods are directly depend on smallholder livestock production activities. And because of how small these farms are set up or the number of animals or crops that smallholder farmers are growing, then there's quite a variety of farming systems being practiced. So of course, landscapes are varied across Africa. Farming systems would be different. Livestock breeds that are being kept or practiced are quite different. Sociocultural traits and access to markets and livelihoods, all this vary. So there's no one solution for all the challenges that the smallholder farmer in Africa faces. This has to be tailor-made to specific areas, to specific cultures as well. So who is a smallholder farmer? This is a producer who rears livestock on a limited scale. And the hallmarks of such production is that the farm would be family owned as majority of the workers would basically be family labor, so relatives working on the farm. Majority operate on less than 5 acres of land. In fact, 5 acres is on the larger size. Majority would be operating about an eighth of an acre, as we've seen with most of our pig producers. A portion of what they produce, they use for their own consumption and sell the rest to the market. And the markets vary. You have your formal markets, you have your informal markets. And lastly, the smallholder produces about 35% of what the world needs. And in Africa, this is a higher percentage, 80%. So they are very key in the production or in feeding populations and therefore contribute to food security in a big way. The industry in Africa is structured like that, and I believe across the world, all over. You have your input supply, so you're looking at your live animals, feed, water, animal health services, extension, then production, marketing. You'd have processing and consumption. Processing varies. You have your smallholder mostly going to your local slaughterhouse and just producing for local consumption and doesn't go through the step of value addition, packaging, and distribution. But there are quite a few organizations or industries that now go to the next level, which is where Farmers Choice would also come in, where there's a bit of value addition, packing, distribution, and then we also service the export market in East and Central Africa as well. This was just to give us an indication of the consumption of meat in Africa, especially Eastern Africa, and the growth rates that are expected. So if you think back to the percentage of what the smallholder farmer produces, you can see that the impact would be quite big, or production would need to increase quite significantly to meet this projection. So looking at pork, which is what I would focus on mostly, there is estimated growth percentage change between 2010 to 2050 of 268%. So quite significant, and the smallholder has to be supported to be able to meet this demand. Africa has a very small population of pigs, as you can see there, 3%. But I put this up just to show that you can see the Americas, Europe, Asia, quite big. But the interesting trend over the last 5 years is that the population, especially in Asia, disease, and Europe is going down. But on the opposite side, the pig population in Africa is increasing quite significantly. When I started out at Farmer's Choice, the population in Kenya was projected at about 200,000 pigs. We are currently at about 800,000, quite small, but growing quite rapidly. And the interest from farmers, and especially small-scale farmers, is increasing by the day. So again, I've just looked at the pig production systems that we deal with as an organization. We have basically the smallholder or backyard, who is farming about 1 to 10 pigs, the small to medium scale, who has 5 to 20 sows, the medium scale with 20 to 500, and the large scale with more than 500 sows. Majority of our farmers are in the smallholders to the small medium scale holder category. We are the only large scale producer with over 500 sows. So the farmer with the 1 to 10, 5 to 20 sows, our biggest supporter, and they're actually supplying about 80% of what we currently slaughter in our facility. So what challenges are they facing? I already touched briefly on urbanization and population growth. So as this population grows, and growth and urbanization go hand in hand, and of course there'll be an increased requirement for meat, as I mentioned, especially in the sub-Saharan demographic. So while the population increases, the average farm size is decreasing. Land distribution becomes more concentrated, and of course this will impact the smallholder directly, because then it comes with its own challenges in production constraints. I was sharing with a colleague that Farmer's Choice has been in existence since 1980. Initially, we had about 5 farm locations. We have had to close down about 2. And that is just because people have come and built up homes around us, and we've been forced to move away because of challenges of issues like smell, flies. Yeah, so residential homes come up and they're like, no, we do not want to know where our food comes from. You guys move out. So we've had to look for different locations to do pig farming. But with time, we are finding that everywhere we go, population follows, and we have to look at how we are producing, which is very expensive at the end of the day. Land pressure and land degradation, changes in land tenure. I think mostly in Africa, there was quite a bit of, how do I say, free and restricted access to land. So farmers would be able to move from one point to another with their animals without any issues. Of course, with the growth and what ownership of land has changed. So quite a bit of restriction in how you can do your farming. Poor land management practices, soil degradation, lack of water, and of course, proper animal management has all had an impact directly on the small scale farmer. So the changes are happening, but we don't have, do I say, the education to keep up or to train the farmer to get to the same level where they're still producing animals, I'll use the word productively, and able to sustain their livelihoods as well. Climate change has been touched on a little bit by previous speakers, but this is quite key. Of course, with this, we are seeing extended droughts, high temperatures, and extended droughts and feed comes in hand, and we are struggling, especially currently at the moment, to feed pigs and livestock as in general. We have seen feed costs increase by about 50% in the last 1 year, and we still expect this farmer to produce, and the consumer doesn't want to pay more for the product on the market. So quite a challenge to get a balance where we are able to produce productively. Agricultural research and development has lagged behind quite a bit in Africa, just because we have governments that don't support or don't have policies in place that would support, say, biotechnology. And there's a bit of, do I say investment from the private sector, but it hasn't caught up yet 100% with the need or the demand. So in the past, there have been quite a few initiatives to try and introduce the genetic improvement in livestock in Africa as a whole. But this has failed due to various reasons. Dependence on breed replacement and indiscriminate crossbreeding of native and exotic breeds without basically understanding how possibly the native breeds can be promoted to increase productivity. So you have exotic breeds coming in and not being suitable for the environments that they're brought into. Very expensive investments, but then they end up failing. So I think that touches on the second point as well, incompatibility of introduced genotypes with producers' breeding objectives, management practices, and environmental conditions. In some of the slides that follow, you'll see how some of our pig producers are growing their pigs. So if you introduce a very sensitive or delicate gene or genetics into that environment, of course, you will not get the results that you're looking for. So there's a lack of comprehensive approach to the design simple but effective breeding strategies. We are, how do I put it? Even introducing something like AI has been quite a challenge because the farmer, first of all, has to accept it. And then that would go hand in hand with things like reporting or keeping records. So you have to come up with a very simple system that the farmer would be able to adopt without, finding it and as an additional, work for him to do and all. So previous interventions have been quite complicated, and that's not well adopted. So they might be accepted at research level, but practically they're not workable. Breed evaluation, I think, comes hand in hand with the record keeping I was talking about. So there has to be a formula where you are keeping your records that you can then evaluate and then use for further improvement of the genetics. Feed scarcity, I'd also touched on a little bit. Lack of animal housing. Investment in animal housing is quite something else, quite expensive. So you'll find most farmers use very basic material that's at times with exotic genetics and what might not work to increase production. So that would be a challenge. Animal disease is another issue. Lack of farmer knowledge and organizations. Lack of information and direct access to markets. So yes, if you introduce this genetics, is there a market at the end of the day? Productivity increases. Does the farmer have a place where they will actually take their product or their produce to the market? Lack of proper finance and credit. Lack of political goodwill and government investments I touched on already. But yeah, finance and credit is very key. We find that importing genetics into the country, I'll just use our own example, in Kenya is very expensive. We bring in animals from Europe. We are currently working with PIC, and a boa imported from them, from the maternal line, arrives at our location at approximately 800,000 Kenyan shillings. Yeah, so you're imagining a smallholder farmer would not be able to afford that at all. So we bring in genetics to our facility, and then we are trying to now multiply them within our sites and then disseminate to a smallholder farmer to be able to meet the requirements that we would want in our facility, the slaughterhouse for meat. So just some images showing what some of what we've come across dealing with smallholder farmers. So you can see basically feeding with kale, with the maize stalks, the material used for the buildings, literally very basic. So what we have done as an organization is come up with an extension team that goes out to the farmers to now educate them on how to do, because there's no need for us to promote the improved genetics without now giving them the knowledge that goes hand in hand with that to ensure that they've increased their production. This is now from our own facilities. We do both slatted floors and straw bedding. So you can compare the two and see the difference. So we are able to get quite good results comparable with others in the rest of the world. But we are saying we are able to do this. Would our farmer be able to afford such? So we are saying try and promote them using cheaper materials to be able to just improve their production a little bit. So the model of farmer's choice is that we have our own feed mills. We have pigs from our own farms, 20% of what we slaughter. We have what we are calling third-party pigs or contracted farmers producing 80%. And then the pigs that come from this all go into our processing plant, so for slaughter. We also have a beef slaughterhouse that does cattle, sheep, and goats. And the proceeds or the products from this are sold to the domestic market and to the export market. So looking at the farms and what we do with the smallholder farmer, the feed mills produce 500 tons of feed per week. Our own farms have a total pig population of 2,000 pigs, so about 1,800 sows. We have a multiplication unit, which has our nucleus and multiplication herd. So that is where the animals we brought in from PIC are stationed. So we work with the landrace and the large white. Then at the AI center, we have our maternal line boars and our terminal line boars. So the terminal line is the P380, and then the landrace and the large white. So we've gotten very good results from this. We've managed to increase our litter size. We've managed to reduce our age to slaughter. We've managed to get heavier pigs at about 23 weeks of age. Still a work in progress, but this is the same knowledge that we're saying, or a result we are saying we want to transfer to our contracted farmer. So the commercial farms are our own farms with 1,200 cows, and then everything from that ends up at our slaughterhouse in Nairobi. And feed, part of the feed we produce, as we are saying, feed is very important to the producer with new genetics. Part of the feed we produce is then sold to our contract farmers at cost, all in an effort to ensure productivity and to keep their production cost low. We have a very simple AI center. That's where our 15 boars are. So the 4 maternal line boars, 11 terminal line boars, all sourced from PIC. So basic semen collection, analysis, packaging, storage, and distribution. We are currently producing about 200 doses of semen weekly. So I've listed the traits that we are benefiting from the pigs that we have imported, and that we are saying we have seen quite good results. They have adapted very well to our environment, and the same is what we want to transfer to our farmers. So there's need for access to improve genetics by the smallholder. And the key there is that the biggest contributor of profitability in any production system is genetics. So sustained genetic development or improvement, and the speed at which it can be incorporated into all levels of production. The smallholder farmer is, farming is characterized by low productivity. So this is where we are targeting, because we are saying if they're producing 80% of what we slaughter, we would really want to support them to be able to do this very cost effectively, and without risking closing the business. Because in the past, we would always produce our own 60%, 70% from our own farms. But we are saying to promote them, we have to actually now go a step ahead, offer extension education, offer genetics, and the technical know-how, because even AI in Kenya, focus has been quite a bit on dairy animals, beef animals, but not on pigs. So as the population is growing, we are now saying as Farmers Choice, yes, we are a private entity, but we will do our best to support the industry because we are the only export licensed slaughterhouse currently. So by promoting that, of course, that improves productivity. And I have a few extra points here that I hadn't put on the slide, but yeah, increasing productivity will then improve food security. And by extension, livelihoods will be improved because of increased incomes. There will be employment throughout the value chain. Yeah, as you saw, the value chain, as I highlighted, unemployment is quite high in Africa. And if we are able to work on the smallholder farmer, of course, we will increase employment by extension. Disease control was mentioned briefly by other speakers, but yes, it is quite a challenge, even with our production systems, the kind of housing you've seen and what. So if we are able to put in genetics that are disease resistant, we will be able to actually now increase numbers, incomes, and livelihoods by extension. Climate change and carbon emissions is a big conversation, even for us at the moment. So if we are able to increase productivity without necessarily increasing the numbers we are producing, and then feed efficiency and all, the impact on the environment would be quite huge. So these are the main reasons why we would need to think about improving access to genetics in Africa. So I have just gone a step ahead there and said, what will successful intervention encompass? Because just introducing new genetics or improved genetics alone will not help, looking at our situation. So from the animal perspective, and these are all production farmers, we need to look at the animals, so the genetics, the disease status. From a management point of view, we would need to look at husbandry, nutrition, and health. And from an environment point of view, we need to look at the farm setup, we would need to look at the housing, and we would need to look at provision of equipment. So all these areas are lacking, and technical know-how and all has to be introduced to the farmer if we are to reap the benefits of improved genetics. So genetics alone will not work. We would have to bring in everything at the same time. So thank you.